If, like me, you've spent many years doing spiritual seeking, trying to find out the truth, trying to attain a higher sense of self, wanting to see through the illusion and find out what reality is behind the veil, then in this video I'm going to give an overview of this book by Shiv Sengupta called Advaitaholics Anonymous. I think I've said that right. I'm going to give an overview of the book and also my key takeaways from it, because I think this helps to really put the struggle with spiritual seeking into perspective and gives a really common sense, down-to-earth view of what we should be doing. So just a bit about Shiv Sengupta. This is from the book, so I've summarised it. So he had an awakening experience in his 20s after suffering from depression. After that, he tried to recreate the experience, and he realised that awakening wasn't a solution in itself, but a way to approach the problem, or perhaps the mystery of this human experience, without, quote, metaphysical rationalizations, spiritual belief systems, or cut-and-dried scientific explanations, close quote. He says that his mind wasn't his own, but that it had been shaped by society, peer groups, spiritual gurus. In 2018, he created a Facebook page called Advaitaholics Anonymous, where he shared his reflections, and people seemed to enjoy his common sense approach. So this book is a compilation of those writings, and some of those, the chapters are responses to viewers' or readers' questions. And you can see the readers' questions in the chapter, which I found really helpful, because a lot of those questions are questions that I've had too. So Shiv has written another 2 volumes after this book. So this first volume is called Sobering Insights for Spiritual Addicts. The second volume is called A Manifesto for Spiritual Anarchy. And the third is An Antidote to Spiritual Enlightenment. He also has a Substack called The Dark Night with a K of the Soul. So I'll link to all of these books in the description as well as the Substack. So my thoughts on the book generally, I like Shiv's style of writing. He can be blunt at times, and that did jar a bit sometimes, I have to admit. But it didn't put me off, because I think sometimes we need some bluntness. We don't need any more sugarcoating. Also, Shiv does swear in the book. I don't know if that bothers you. It doesn't bother me at all, but just in case you're not a fan of that, it's just to be aware. I like the fact that Shiv isn't pushing people into awakening being the be-all and end-all. In fact, he says that how it's advertised by spiritual gurus, it's kind of seen to be this huge epiphany, whereas in fact his experience and other people's experiences that he's spoken to, it's not like that. So I had 7 takeaways from this book that I'll go through with you. The first takeaway is that spiritual seeking can become an addiction, and I really relate to this. One of the chapters in this book was a reader's question, and they talked about feeling really exhausted through their spiritual seeking, and as much as they've tried finding answers, they haven't come to any answers. And that really actually teared up when I read that, because that is just how I had experienced it. I felt really tired and as though I was trying to get somewhere, when really what I needed to do is center my focus on where I am. It's almost as if I felt if I awakened and if, I managed to lift the veil on this reality, that maybe it would be better. But actually, I don't know if I really need to be awakened, or if I need to have that experience to navigate and live in this reality, this form-based reality, in a different way. Something else that came through from the book is that learning from teachers can be helpful, but there are certainly downsides. And Shiv talks about how spiritual teachers and gurus don't always have their students' best interests at heart. Spiritual teachers are human beings like the rest of us. They are fallible. For some of them, this might be an ego trip, having lots of followers and lots of people showering praise on them. And Shiv made a really good point actually about, if you're a teacher, your aim is to get your students through the class, for them to graduate and for them to not need to come back. Whereas a lot of spiritual teachers have followers for years and years who never graduate and go off on their own. So what is that saying? Does it mean that them as a teacher aren't doing their job properly? They're not teaching their students to the required level that they can go off on their own, graduate, get their wings. It's made me realise that it's good to listen to what teachers have to say, but not hold on to any of it too tightly. To remember that we are responsible for ourselves, that we need to make decisions about what we do and how we navigate this life, rather than handing all of that responsibility over to somebody else, because that is negating our responsibility for our growth over to someone else who may not have our interests at heart. I mean, Shiv himself doesn't say that he's the authority, he's just giving his perspective, and then people have the freedom to disagree or agree as they see fit. And I think that's important, that we take that into any books we read or any practices or any teachers that we follow. Don't feel that you have to agree on everything they say. That doesn't mean to say that you are failing as a student, because teachers, they are not necessarily right about everything, and that maybe their experience of awakening, that's very very applicable to them, and that's right and has applicability to their lives, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's applicable to your life. The next takeaway I had from this book is that awakening isn't an end to aspire to. So what I mean by this is that if you do awaken, that's not it. In fact, from what I got from this book, it's more like another beginning. After awakening, you don't stay in that awakened state forever. You've got to come back here at some point. Your ego and your material mind will come back into play at some point. However, the awakening experience can shift your perspective on this material reality, and then it's up to you to take responsibility to live differently if you want to. Now that you've seen the other side or the truth or whatever that is, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to live your life differently? Are the things that you used to hold on to so tightly, are they things you can now let go of? I've never had an awakening experience, so I don't even know what that feels like. I don't even know how that would change my perspective or how I might see things differently. But once you have, I imagine that you can't come back to this reality the same sort of person. It must change your perspective in some way. But if we see awakening as the end in itself, we get into this addiction of following spiritual teachers and gurus and doing things just for the aim of getting to that place. So Shiv talks about, if I've interpreted this correctly, but Shiv talks about the best spiritual practice being to engage in life as it is now, the good and the bad, and maybe not even labeling things as good or bad. We have experiences. It's a bit like emotions. We label emotions positive and negative, but really they're just different emotions that we experience as human beings. And to embrace those as being part of this, of us being in this physical form and in this mind body, they are all part of the experience of our human self in this reality. So embracing these things, embracing the emotions, the experiences, embracing life as it's life. We get up out of bed, we have a shower, we eat breakfast, we go to work. This is all an experience we're having. And what I've been thinking is I've been so focused on finding out the quote unquote truth that I'm missing the beauty of this. This is a mystery. Why are we here in this mind body? What is this all about? And you know what? We may never find out. But then if we spend all our time striving to find that out, we miss the beauty of being in this mysterious place. I've been listening to a podcast recently about Meister Eckhart, the Christian mystic, and I think someone asked him the question, why do you live? And he answered with, my word, I don't know, but it's good, or it's so great to be alive. And that kind of I don't know was a real permission giving thing for me to say that I can enjoy this life even if I don't know or don't fully understand what it's about. The next thing I took away from this is that ego isn't good or bad. I think the ego has enabled us humans to achieve great and extraordinary things in this life. If we hadn't been able to imagine the things we wanted to do and then put those things into practice, manifest those things, we couldn't have done that without our egos. Equally, the ego has been responsible for many atrocities in humanity, so we cannot forget those. But it's not either good or bad. There's a lot of grey, a lot of nuance in between. And as much as it might be nice to not be controlled by the ego, I feel that the ego helps me to live in this reality. I don't think I could function without it because I'm interacting with other egos. But maybe what I can do is be more aware of when my ego is showing up and maybe taking me down a path that isn't really where I want to go, figuring out the triggers to my ego and living and responding in ways that are not coming from that place of ego so much. I'm not so hung up on awakening, but I am very intrigued as to what it would feel like in terms of not being attached to a sense of self, to that ego. Shiv says that, well, you know, once you've had it, it's like, well, you come back to this. So it's not like you can stay in that egoless state. Another takeaway from this book is that non-acceptance of this reality that we're in is why we suffer. And I think this came from another reader question that I think I've really struggled with. The fact my dad died when I was in my early teens, and I had an experience that made me realise that this physical reality isn't all there is. There was something else out there. I don't know what it is. I don't understand, but I just know that there is. And ever since that time, it's really led me on a desire to find out what that is and almost be unhappy and discontent with being in this physical reality. Whereas this is where I am. This is where not I as in the true I, but my body, mind, myself as I am, made up of all the experiences and beliefs and cultural influences that I am. This is where I exist. And so I need to make the most of it. I either do that or I'm in perpetual misery here. And how can I make the most of this reality? There's an analogy that Shiv uses about a boy building a sandcastle on the beach, and that we need both the sand and the ocean. If we only had the sand, it would be too dry and the sandcastle couldn't be held together. And if we only had the ocean, there would be too much water for the sand to maintain its form. You know, this boy on the beach continually building the sandcastle, and then the ocean wave comes in and destroys it, and he gets upset, and so he starts rebuilding this sandcastle. And that's what we do, isn't it? And we cling on to the sandcastle. We try to avoid it getting destroyed, but there's just, it's going to be. One day it will be destroyed. Everything that we hold dear will be destroyed. It will be dissolved. And that is a part of the reality that we live in. Shiv also talks about all that we can do is play in the sand whilst accepting that during our playtime on this earth, things will dissolve and be destroyed, and that we can carry on playing until we too return to the ocean. Play in this mystery that is this life. Which leads me on to the next takeaway, really, is the beauty of not knowing and embracing the mystery. Shiv talks about watching a wasp on his car windscreen and how the wasp is simple and complex at the same time. We don't understand it and we don't know how it came to be, but it's fascinating to watch. And I feel the same about birds. I remember from a very young age as a little girl, I had this memory that I was stood in my grandparents' garden and watching a sparrow sitting on the top of a post, and I remember believing that I could talk to the birds and have conversations with them. I don't understand them, but I watch them just being and doing what birds do. There's some feeling that wells up in me when I observe birds, that it does make me feel connected to, I don't know what it is, whether it is that thing that is the essence of everything, that is a part of the essence of everything, that fuels it, that conducts it, that guides it. And I like to think that it is a realisation that is beyond words in me of what this is all about, but that I can't articulate it. So I hope this has been a helpful review and those takeaways have been useful. If you have read this book, or if you've got some insights about non-dualism and awakening that you want to share, please let me know down in the comments. I'm going to be reading more books on non-dualism that I hope to be able to review on this channel and just share my takeaways. This is a topic that I'm really passionate about, and I hope that by talking through my learning, it will be useful to you as well. Take good care, and I will see you soon.